Young William was meandering along the country lanes of his village in Cornard, eyeing up the succulent-looking apples in one of the trees overhanging the farm's field, when a great shadow passed over him. And looking up to see what on earth could create such a big shadow, he saw something that made him quake in his boots. A huge, leathery winged beast flying through the air and coming to land not so very far from himself, perhaps less than a quarter of a mile from where he was, in a meadow, and land with such a thud that even a quarter of a mile or less away that he was, he could feel the shake and the vibration in the ground. His mouth dropped open. All thoughts of apples fled from his mind. He had to see what this thing was, even though he was scared to death, but with that sort of boyish enthusiasm that youngsters have, that obliviousness to danger, he ran as fast as his legs would carry him down the country lane, calling to whatever friends he saw as he passed, until within 20 minutes a whole gang of youngsters and some adults had gathered on the edge of the meadow to see that enormous black leathery beast sitting, squatting, tongue lolling, claws tearing up the soil of the meadow, watching them with great slitted eyes, the likes of which they had never seen before, for not one of those Cornard villagers had ever, understandably, clapped eyes on a real live dragon. But dragon it was. And one of the adults, being the taller, said that they had seen the beast flying from somewhere roughly around Keddington Hill. It had flown over and over the houses, over the fields, over the woodlands, to come down and land in this meadow. Then it threw back its head and roared, such a thunderous roar that all of the children and adults clapped their hands over their ears and quaked and shook and crouched low to the ground, quite expecting the beast to come over and eat them at any second. But it did not. For from the distance, and one of the adults reckoned it was roughly around where Ballingdon Hill must be, they heard an answering roar, loud and thunderous, and the air shook, although not as much as it had done when the black dragon roared, for the black dragon, of course, was but a few dozen yards away from where they were quaking and hiding on the other side of a hedgerow. And the wind began to stir. And within a matter of seconds they heard a great beating and flapping of enormous wings, and the braver of the boys and girls and adults peeked up over the top of the hedge, and they saw flying towards them a great leathery red shape, until that too came down into the meadow with a tremendous thump and a shake and a quake. And there were the two dragons, the black dragon from the Suffolk hill of Keddington and the red dragon from the Essex hill of Ballingdon. And they roared and they shook and they clawed and tore at each other, snapping and turning, tails whipping hither and yon, wings up in positions to indicate their rage and their fury. They spied at each other, hissing and spitting gobbets of green ooze and of red ooze and black ooze and all manner of disgusting colours of slime that they spat, hissing and sizzling, and sometimes burning the skin of the other dragon, and sometimes landing in the field itself, frying up the flowers that grew within the meadow. Well, this went on for a full half hour, roaring and thundering and ripping and tearing, and more villagers came to join and to watch and to see what on earth it was that was causing the very ground to shake, the trees to quake, the apples to fall in the orchards. And they all stood and they watched, agog, shocked, horrified, muttering of all of the old legends that they could remember from yesteryear about the two dragons that slept in the respective hills. What could have woken these dragons up? What could have caused them to come and meet each other in the meadow in Cornard to fight? None of them knew, none of them could possibly know. that they had been awoken by the spells and chantings of rival witches and wizards, for there in Essex was the old witch of Essex, who had summoned up the spirit of the Red Dragon. When she had heard her rival, her hated, despised rival, the Wizard of Suffolk, summoning up the Black Dragon from the hill to prove once and for all who was the greatest of the two, who should reign supreme, not simply the Wizard of Suffolk and the Witch of Essex, but the very people of Suffolk, the very people of Essex. And so they had sent their dragons to meet. For years these two had feuded, casting spells at each other and defending them with protective talismans and charms to stave off the powers of the other. For few people can feud and fight as much as those devoted to the arcane arts, waving their wands and their handbags each at the other for year after year after year, until it had met this crux of resentment and bitterness between the two. And they had decided to put to the test the bragging and the claims of the rival county. And there the people of the village of Cornard watched the fight take place, watched the resolution, or was it a resolution, who can say? But the dragons fought, and they fought, and they fought. Great gouts of blood flying left, great gouts of blood flying right, scales dropping to the ground, claws being left wedged into the bodies of trees as dragon slung into dragon and threw each other from one end of the meadow to the other end of the meadow. And what was once a nice, peaceful, flowery meadow, by the end of this fight looked as if a bomb had dropped. It was churned and gouted and gored, plants thrown hither and yon, rabbits crushed underfoot, badgers terrorised into psychosis. A terrible, terrible mess was created of that poor meadow. And when at the end of this battle, the Black Dragon, bleeding and dripping and gouting, took to the air and flew back to Keddington Hill, the people of Essex declared their Red Dragon the winner, and the Red Dragon flew up, flapping its great wide wings, roaring and thundering and shaking the very air, and leaving half the villagers stone deaf for the remainder of their life, and returned to its hill in Ballingdon. But the people of Suffolk, they said, those of them who could still hear enough to say anything, said that this was but one round in an ongoing fight, and not the end, for each dragon, red and black, Suffolk and Essex alike, still lived, still survived to fight another day. And this ludicrous claim from the people of Essex that the fight was over and won and unproven and definite was the usual typical windbaggery and bragging of the Essex lot. What is the truth of the matter? Well, who can say? But the Black Dragon still sleeps deep in Keddington Hill, as the Red Dragon still sleeps deep in Ballingdon Hill. And of Sharpfight Meadow, for such became the name of the meadow where this terrible battle between the two dragons took place, well, sadly that is now hidden by the passage of time and the advance of concrete and tarmac. But perhaps for those who sit still long enough on the roadsides and can hear the vibrations in the earth, maybe the rage of fighting dragons still echoes up from what very little is left of the meadow. And perhaps those who go and sit upon Keddington or upon Ballingdon Hills might, if they're quiet enough and still enough and brave enough, hear the snoring of the sleeping dragons, hear them rolling over in their sleep and muttering to themselves of their plans for their next feud, their next battle. For whilst the wizard and the witch of Suffolk and Essex, who reigned back in 1449, are of course long since dead, their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are still around and still feuding and still fighting, for memories are long in this part of the country and bitterness runs deep. and peace is seldom truly achieved for long. And it is only a matter of time, of course, before some witch or some wizard seeks to reawaken the dragons within their respective hills and send them to fight once again. And this time, instead of gouting up a meadow, they'll be gouting up tarmac and houses and supermarkets as the dragons rage and rage and rage. And who knows? Who knows? Maybe this time one of them will actually win.